Here's a fun rumor that I thought would be worthwhile to discuss. It's a super wild rumor that Panasonic is creating some kind of fixed lens anamorphic cinema camera. The note says that Panasonic is considering making a full frame camera with IBIS and a 35mm fixed anamorphic 2x lens with LiDAR autofocus included for all filmmakers that use the 35mm 2x almost exclusively. It can do 4K 120 frames per second and a very attractive price around $3,000. Now, this is a pretty wild rumor and probably not worth talking about from a literal sense in terms of thinking this thing is actually coming out. But I do think it's interesting to talk about from a more philosophical, esoteric perspective of like, if this camera did exist, would people buy it? And if you said that it's $3,000 for a full frame anamorphic camera with IBIS, would I buy that? And I think no, I wouldn't. Even at an attractive price point like $3,000, that still is a little too expensive for something with a really singular, dedicated purpose. If you really love anamorphic content, then yeah, maybe something like this would work for you. But nowadays, so much has gone vertical that shooting extra wide, like a 2x, twice as wide as it is tall, that's a tough bargain, a tough pill to swallow if you are spending $3,000 on a camera that can only do that one thing. Now, if it had IBIS and if it had some kind of good autofocus, that is really nice to have because those things are harder to find when it comes to anamorphic cameras. It's actually one of the cool things about anamorphic on Lumix that there is IBIS built for anamorphics at all the different at all the different squeeze factors from 2x to 1.5, 1.8. There's a lot of them in there in the Lumix menu. You can adjust your IBIS for the anamorphic that you're using. So I do like that, but it's a kind of a one-trick pony. And if they were to create this camera, I'm sure there's like one or two people out there, maybe you're one of them, who would gladly scoop it up and buy it. But I think for the rest of us, we'd look at it more as like a novelty, more as like an interesting, oh, weird that they did that. They spent time on that when we were actually waiting for an S1H Mark II or a GX10 or something like that. There's plenty from Lumix that I'd be more excited about, something that was a little bit more universal, something that was not quite this niche, but I will say that if it was a good anamorphic lens and if it were quality optics, that would go a long way in convincing me. Because even a decent anamorphic lens alone could cost you $3,000. So to get the camera and everything that goes along with it, then great. It's a all-in-one. Just grab it and go. You can do anything you want, but you are kind of stuck with that focal length, and that's one of the downsides, unfortunately, for me, of anything with a fixed lens. That is just so limiting. I think there's a time and a place for it. You can, theoretically, you can make the lens smaller if it's fixed to the camera. So the Fuji cameras that I forget is the what is the X100 6 or whatever. There's a few fixed lens cameras that are quite popular that people do seem to like, but for me, it's never really hit the mark because I'd always prefer something with an interchangeable lens to give me more control over what I'm doing, how I'm capturing it. Being able to pick a lens, I think, is far more valuable than being stuck with a camera body that only has the one focal length. Even if it were the focal length I used the most, I still am constantly, changing lenses depending on the environment, depending on the circumstance, depending on the situation. And having that flexibility, even if it's affordable to, have something fixed, it's a sacrifice that you're making in exchange for maybe shaving a few dollars off here or there. Hey, I can get an anamorphic camera for $3,000. Cool. What else can you do with it? Whereas you might, spend $2,000 on an interchangeable lens camera, and then you can do whatever you want. You can adapt anamorphic to it. You can shoot spherical. You can shoot with longer focal lengths. You can shoot with wider focal lengths. That to me is more comfortable when I'm thinking about what I would spend my money on. But I do like the idea of play that is associated with this rumor. Thinking outside the box. I don't think this is actually going to happen. I think this is someone's crazy fantasy dream that they just hallucinated and sent over to L rumors saying like, hey, Panasonic is considering this, which, yeah, sure, maybe they had a meeting one day and they were talking about what if we did something crazy like this. I do like that though, because I think that's where some of the best ideas come from. What if we had a really great Lumix anamorphic set They make the camera bodies that can shoot anamorphic. They make lenses, but Lumix, Panasonic, doesn't make anamorphic lenses. Why not add that to the feature set? It would certainly differentiate the lineup. Sony isn't making anamorphic lenses. Canon isn't making anamorphic. Nikon isn't making anamorphics. If you want anamorphic, you have to go with some obscure third party. They're usually not electronic. And so you're limiting yourself in terms of optical performance and what's actually possible. I think anamorphic lenses from Lumix would actually sell quite well, considering every Lumix camera going back, gosh, certainly the GH4. I'm trying to remember if on the GH3 you could do it, but certainly on the GH4 and beyond, you've been able to shoot anamorphic, gosh, over 10 years now, like quite well in a camera that would show you the D-squeeze, would shoot actual open gate, so you're not limited to 16:9. You can use the full sensor 4:3 or 3:2 if you're shooting full frame. Having that real estate to shoot anamorphic properly was one of the main advantages of why I chose Lumix in the first place, just because I think that's such a cinematic, high quality, premium feature to have in a camera that was only $1,000 or $2,000 at the time. So those types of features do sell camera bodies, but layer on quality optics to go with that. And now we're talking about something quite interesting, especially if we're looking at the smaller anamorphic lenses. I think it's Laowa makes their nanomorph lenses, and those are tiny. And that's great. I think that's what we all want. We want things compact, easy to use, high quality optics. Add in some quality autofocusing if it was either with LiDAR or phase detect, maybe a hybrid of the two, I don't know. But those kind of features are actually the type of outside the box thinking that do get me excited. So while this one particularly rumored camera with a fixed lens and these sorts of features doesn't get me that excited, that type of thinking does, because it opens up a pathway to investing in something actually unique that is in somewhat high demand, because I don't want a camera with only anamorphic capabilities, but I do like the idea of a camera that can capitalize on those anamorphic capabilities from time to time when they're needed. Sometimes I'm shooting multi-platform content that needs to be multi-format, meaning it needs to be vertical and horizontal. Open gate is great for that. However, there's other times where I might want to intentionally shoot anamorphic, and using open gate with a quality anamorphic lens would be fantastic. It's just I've had such a hard time finding anything good that isn't terribly expensive. So if you say that this camera, all features included, lens included, is only $3,000, well, that's exciting from the prospect of, well, maybe what would the lens alone cost? $1,500? $2,000? $1,000? If we had a decent anamorphic lens lineup from Lumix, I think I would certainly want to get my hands on that, at least to test, at least to rent, to try it out and see how it performs, because that's been the downside of anamorphic. We've got cameras that can do it, but getting your hands on decent optics that aren't a chore to use, which has always been my struggle with anamorphic. Using the lenses can be frustrating. It can be tedious. They're often heavy and bulky, and they don't focus quite right, and you're sacrificing the optical quality just to have these goofy distortions and some extra lens flares. The aesthetic is nice, but not when it comes at the sacrifice of poor optical performance. So if I got some decent lenses from Lumix, from Panasonic, I think that's the type of rumor that I'd be more excited for.